Mr. Deputy Speaker, tax-free ISAs have been an extraordinarily popular way to save, including for those saving for a deposit on their first home. Since their introduction in 1999, 19 million people have taken them out, saving over £270 billion. From next month, the annual ISA limit will rise from £7,200 to £10,200, of which half can be saved in cash. And to help encourage saving further, I've decided that ISA limits will increase annually in line with inflation. Now, these changes come at a time when the savings ratio has already risen strongly over the past year to the highest it's been since 1998. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the last year has been tough for many people, but the evidence shows it would have been harder still without the choices we made and the action we took to support the economy. We need the same good judgment and decisive action to secure and strengthen the economy and to provide the right basis for the country to seize the opportunities ahead. I want now to turn to my forecasts. As I've said on many occasions, the world economy is still in a period of great uncertainty. In the absence of government action to support the economy, the weakness in some of our overseas markets, particularly Europe, could result in a substantial downward revision of our growth prospects. But because of the action we have taken through the recession and the measures that I am announcing today, I believe that only a small reduction is needed. This year, as I said in last year's budget and last year's pre-budget report, I expect the economy to grow between 1 and 1.5%. I've decided to revise slightly downwards my forecast for 2011 to bring it into line with those of the Bank of England to growth between 3 and 3.5%. And projections for the public finances are based as normal on the lower end of these forecast ranges. And as the economy continues to rebalance following the recession, my forecast for the following years is unchanged. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we've already seen inflation rise above 3% in the first month of this year, increasing the cost of living. The inflation figures released yesterday show a rise of 3%. And although high compared to recent years, this is a far lower sum than the peaks of inflation of over 10% in the 1990s and 20% in the 1980s. And as the Governor of the Bank of England has said, the present increase in inflation should be temporary and results from the ending of the VAT cut and other one-off factors. I want, however, to help families and business through this period. So I've decided to stage next month's increase in fuel duties. Instead of the planned increase, fuel duty will rise by a penny in April, which is less than inflation, and it will be followed by a further 1 penny rise in October and the remainder in January. And the staging will ease the pressure on businesses and family incomes at a time when other prices are increasing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, by the time the full rise comes in at the beginning of next year, I am forecasting inflation will be back at 2%. And I am today writing to the Governor of the Bank of England in the usual way to confirm that inflation target remains unchanged at 2%. So with interest rates also expected to remain low and stable, this is essential for future growth. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the cost of stabilising the financial system and stimulating economies has meant an inevitable increase in government borrowing here and around the world. This has been exacerbated by the sharp fall in tax revenues during the recession. The importance of our financial industry, which provided 1 in every £4 in corporation tax, has meant that we have been particularly badly hit. At the pre-budget report, I forecast that public sector net borrowing would reach £178 billion this year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we now have hard data rather than forecasts on tax revenues for 11 months of this financial year. And as a direct result of the action we took supporting the economy at a difficult time, tax receipts in December, January and February have been better than expected. More resilient consumers and retailers have meant that VAT receipts are now £3 billion higher. Better company profits have led to higher corporation tax receipts. With more people having stayed in work, income tax revenues are stronger. These are the results of the deliberate choices we've made over the last 2 years. And at the same time, spending, including on benefits and tax credits, has been broadly in line with our forecast. As a result, I can tell the House that borrowing this year should now be £11 billion lower at £167 billion. In 2010-11, in part because of the one-off factors boosting receipts, such as this year's tax on bank bonuses, borrowing will be £163 billion. Now, it would not be sensible to assume that this year's surplus in receipts will be maintained in full in the medium term. But with the economy recovering in later years, together with the revenue from tax increases already announced, borrowing will fall to £131 billion in 2011-12, then to £110 billion. In 2013-14, it will be £89 billion. It will reach £74 billion in 2014-15. That is £8 billion lower than was forecast in December. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this will mean that debt is £100 billion lower by 2013-14 than was expected in last year's budget. As a share of the economy, borrowing is forecast at 11.8% of GDP this year. It will then fall to 11.1% next year, then 8.5%. In 2012-13, it will be 6.8%, then 5.2%, and fall to 4% in 2014 and 15. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this means a reduction in the deficit from 11.8% to 5.2%, more than halved over a 4-year period. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the structural deficit, which takes into account the economic cycle, is estimated to be 8.4% of GDP this year and fall to 2.5% by the end of the period. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is a reduction in the structural deficit of over 2/3, removing the bulk of the structural deficit by the end of the next Parliament. And as I said before, should the economy perform better than expected, we will be able to do more to reduce the deficit. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in 2007, government debt as a share of the economy was lower in the UK than in every other G7 country except Canada.